Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started right now. I'm really excited that you all are here to listen to what we've got going on and how this particular model of development has been really fruitful here in the Bay Area. My name's Greg Jackson, and I'm here with Crystal Huang and Noni Session. We'll both be introducing ourselves in a moment. Since I'm the moderator, I felt I should probably speak first. This is going to be quick. I'm just going to tell you a bit about the Sustainable Economies Law Center, the work I've been doing, and how I've been connected to these folks before we have a little moderated discussion, and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. So my name is Greg Jackson, once again, and I've lived here in Oakland for as long as I can remember, in the flats of East Oakland. Done a lot of development work with my family, working with my dad in his towing business, with my sister in a candy business she had. And that sent me to law school because I realized the amount of support folks need, especially technical assistance, and how hard it can be for family members to convince other family members of the right things to do. In law school, I was able to do a cooperative development program in Berkeley, at what used to be Aspire Charter School, I believe it was, or it was a charter school in Berkeley that recently closed, but I was able to start a cooperative development program there while an intern at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And I've recently become an Equal Justice Works fellow. It's a 2-year paid fellowship where Pillsbury, a law firm in San Francisco, is hosting me. Basically paying for my fellowship while the Sustainable Economies Law Center is holding the work that I'm doing, which is focused on educating, organizing, empowering Black youth here in the Bay Area into cooperative enterprises so that we can have more economic security. We kind of already know like what's weighing down on us here in the Bay. There's high cost of living, people are being displaced out of almost everything that we try and create. But there's also a really vibrant cooperative ecosystem here in the Bay Area. And I see that as an opportunity for us to link what's already been created with what needs to be created so that we can have this new economy that we've been searching for. So at the Sustainable Economies Law Center, our mission is to cultivate a new legal landscape that supports community resilience and grassroots economic empowerment through essential legal tools like education, research, advice, and advocacy, enabling communities everywhere to develop their own sustainable sources of food, housing, energy, jobs, and other vital aspects of a thriving community. And we just had our 10-year anniversary party in October at 7th West, and we're planning on doing a lot more cool things as we're moving through 2020 into this next decade. Part of my project has been both hosting workshops in East Oakland and Richmond, Think Outside the Box workshops, as well as book clubs, letting folks know that cooperatives aren't a foreign thing in Black communities. It's just a lost practice that we've need to reconnect after having moved here during the Great Migration. So just really trying to let people know that, yes, it feels unfamiliar, but it's actually something that's been really powerful in our communities and has been a backbone for the civil rights movement once you start looking into it. And I was lucky enough to link up with Noni at the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative early on in my fellowship, actually before my fellowship. And we've kind of been building out this model ever since. So I'm gonna turn it to Noni and let her introduce what the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is and what we've been up to over the past year.
Hold on. Okay, yes it is. Thanks for the timer. Okay, greetings, hi. My name is Noni Session. I'm the Executive Director of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. Like Gregory, I'm an Oakland native. I'm actually a 3rd generation West Oakland native. So this project is actually very personal to me. I'll get into our mission in a second, but a little background on how this work really lands and how my understanding of what our community needs has been elaborated. It started with running a really, I'm an anthropologist by training. My work is in East Africa among international humanitarians and looking at cultural production within bureaucratic and expertise circles. So we can then extrapolate that to how we're thinking in this nonprofit field, in this impact investment field, in the banking field, and thinking about, as experts, how we are applying our cultural framework to problems that may not be speaking across those walls and lines. So that's kind of the theoretical thrust that I bring to the work. But the personal thrust is really about witnessing. In 2016, we ran a really impactful city council campaign where we were able to really see what's missing in our city and what's missing in the steps from having vulnerable communities to strong represented communities. And what we identified is that the economy is really not serving our most underserved. And we had to think about other economic formations and other ways of thinking about how financial tools serve our communities to move to that place of security and support. So our work in the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is to align the technical, financial, and organizational inputs necessary to support our frontline communities in cooperatively organizing, financing, purchasing, and stewarding properties in Oakland and the East Bay. It's a mouthful, but it's about reconnecting the change from broken, dismantled communities to secure, stable, empowered communities. Within our organization, we recognize that this is not the first time and will not be the last time folks are thinking about healing these processes from beginning to end. And what we've done is East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is a pilot program. In its current configuration, it has not been tried before. And what we've done is we've pulled the best elements from some of the most impactful organizations and some of the most impactful approaches that we see around our landscape. So at its core, as a California cooperative corporation, we are an investment cooperative. We invest in land and housing, and we turn out low-cost capital stacks to create small site developments for community members to collectively govern and asset manage together long-term. We combine the work of the movement building organization. So all of our owner categories are also the people we organize around activating this vision. And it's their community energy, their pledges of $1,000 investments at 1.5% return over 5 years. It's their community ownership dues and their obligation to show up at our community events and learn and change what we understand are the needs of our community. Those are the folks who really move the project forward. As a limited equity housing cooperative, the folks that you would consider renters forever, interminably, become our resident owners who manage the land and housing that we build the capital stacks for, but they also build capital accounts because the critical part of strong, secure communities is the ability to build wealth, right? So as they pay rent, that rent goes into an account where it accounts for their lease share, it accounts for maintenance and emergency fund, but also an equity account that accumulates over time, not artificially inflated by the speculative market, but natural inflation. So then if they want to move, we can buy them out and sell the share to the next person at an affordable rate. We also simulate the work of the Community Land Trust through various of our legal tools and mechanisms. Our bylaws put limitations on our ability to speculatively profit or pass the property or the land back into the speculative market ever. So we've created in our own bylaws a right of first refusal for our resident owners, and then the land trust, and then other co-ops who have similar prohibitions on their ability to profit from the land. We're also building out a lot of legal tools and mechanisms to support other community members, such as the land justice easement, where we are working on a tool to attach to the title of the land that inhibits the land from being speculatively profited upon or charging extractive rents. Our critical part of this work is as a worker co-op. So we are a 7-person staff collective that, although we have an executive director, myself, we're democratically governed. So we do radical power sharing and we focus on internal organizational transformation. Because the issue is as we come across these new concepts and terms that we want to use to transform our community landscape, we're often not working to transform our internal organizational practices that are very much entrenched in command processes, Western hierarchical processes, and extractive expectations of our tools, of our work, of our communities we work with. So if we're creating new organizations underneath our framework, if our framework is not transformed, the new community organizations that we create will also not be transformed. So we are redirecting the way that capital usually flows in the real estate market through our approach, right? So what you understand about the typical real estate market, particularly in a market like Oakland, where 60% of its residents are renters, is that the capital that comes from the property itself, the profit, if you will, goes back to the landlord, who many times does not live in the area or does not circulate among the communities that need the strength of the capital circulating multiple times, and it goes back to the banks. So what we're doing is, as we the people, those folks who fund, manage, and own East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, the investor owners, the community owners, the resident owners, and the staff owners, we put together low-cost capital stacks to create permanently affordable small site development that flows through our organization. We use it to purchase and manage the properties, and then the profits and the equity go back to the resident owners and the investor owners who are part of our community as a whole. So instead of the capital channeling directly out of the community after one circulation, we bring it back into that cycle to add power and wealth to the ecosystem in which all of the most vulnerable communities circulate. So there's great power in the cost of a lower cost capital stack. I mean, all of us in this room know that the cost of money is really what challenges us in developing our communities and our community-based organizations. A typical commercial mortgage functions at about 6% and above. And if you're putting together a capital stack for a purchase of about $1.3 million, there is no way to make that permanently affordable for the folks who most need it. So what we do is we use our community investment model, which is a special exemption that Sustainable Economies Law Center worked to create through the bill AB 816 in around 2014, 2015, that creates an exemption for the California Cooperative Corporation, where before that point, folks could only invest, non-accredited investors, those with a net worth of $1 million or less, could only invest up to $350 into a cooperative endeavor. With this exemption, you can invest up to $1,000 per non-accredited investor. And that means that you can pull together a small body of investors to create a seed for each project. So not only does it create the seed capital stack, it creates the seed of the social capital that then we shop around to our mission-aligned lenders and impact investors to demonstrate that there's community cohesion and a critical mass around each community project and vision. And often what that does is allows us to access other capital that has a nearly or equally low interest rate. And if you look at the 3 columns, you can see the difference in the cost of the project depending on how low we can get an interest rate. What that means is that takes these projects out of this range of what people tend to derisively think of as charity, something that has to be maintained and serviced till the end of time, to projects that are self-funded and self-supported. People's lease shares pays off the mortgage stacks that we have put together for them. Their ability to asset manage is linked into part of our mission work is to cooperatively and collectively govern these small site developments with our community leads and build back in not just the loss of access to networks and capital, but the loss of access to skill sets, the skill sets that reverberate much wider out into their lives and the community than simply just the attainment of the asset itself. Okay, I'm running over. So at this point, we launched for public membership in December 5th, 2018. And we're reaching our 1-year anniversary this December 5th. And we're very proud to say that we have attained 3 community-owned assets. We've brought our first project, Co-op 789, full circle. We just finished our capital campaign for the building rehabs. We were able, through our community investment model, to raise $200,000 in less than 10 weeks at 1.5% for our resident owners. These are our amazing folks here who went out on a limb and really believed in us and went through all of our learning and failing over the course of this year and a little bit last, when we were really trying to get the project funded. And this is the rough project summary. The purchase was about $1.275. Interestingly enough, once the landlord knew that we had a social purpose, he went up on his price and refused to negotiate with us. Thanks. We do all of our projects in partnership with folks who are already making their impact in this field. Northern California Land Trust, like a lot of our partners, are 501c3s. But there's a challenge under the 501c3 frame, is that you cannot solicit capital in the same manner. And although the ability to bring in charitable funds is really important to how we do our operations work, our acquisition work really needs the ability to bring in capital from the market. We are contesting the market by performing next to market actors and demonstrating that you can create equally impactful outcomes without the same presumptions about the limitations of the market. So our Northern California Land Trust partners helped us bring in the Measure KK funds, which is a non-repayable, non-recoverable loan from the city of Oakland, from our millions of dollars of bond money available to us right now to support and stabilize our communities. We also brought in a low interest loan from the Presidio Bank, and we've raised over $200,000 for the rehab money. So right now we're moving into rehab management that we do in partnership with our resident owners, so that you understand what it means for moisture to be seeping into the foundation, or what it means to repair a roof, because those are skill sets that contribute to the ability to asset manage. And we're moving into our arc of our resident education process that goes from decision making to conflict resolution to reading financial pro formas. Our next step is to convert it to full resident ownership over the next 3 years in partnership with NCLT. And our biggest challenge around the work that we're doing, which is one reason we are here today and at many panels with our fellow impact investors, is to really massage our concepts of what are the capacities of the financial tools and the markets we're functioning in right now. And often the challenge with co-ops and lending to co-ops is this concept of risk. And there are 2 critical things for us to think about around risk. The first is just a small fact, that CLTs have a lower default rate than residential mortgage lenders. People pay for their houses and their doors, particularly when they are in dignified settings that are made affordable in relationship to what we know the limitations of residents' incomes are in the markets that we're attempting to serve them. The second one, as organizations, as banks, as lenders who have been part and parcel to the processes that have dismantled our communities, our highest charge is to carry risk on behalf of these communities, knowing that the risk framework is often one that is weighted by race, by class, by gender. So if we continue to apply the same tools without re-questioning and retuning their conversation with the reality in which we find ourselves, the inequalities, then we're simply going to reproduce the same outcomes. If we think about needs, if we think about the risk sitting on our shoulders, which is why East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative carries all of the loans for each of its property acquisitions, right? And each small site pays off its own mortgage loan, but we manage the risk for them. Did I miss something? Oh, I'm very much over time. Okay, 2 seconds. This is our third property in Berkeley, 2449 Prince Street, whose vision is to house underserved artists and dancers. And this is our third property, which is a lot in West Oakland, where we're going to test out some environmentally sound small housing builds and transfer that to our vision for our ADU work in the Deep East to reinvigorate some of the community dynamics that have held for quite some time in the high numbers in East Oakland. And I would like to tell you, as a final note, invest in communities and not commodities. Thank you so much.
Okay, there we go. Hi. All right. I had such a wonderful pleasure to launch the People Power Solar Cooperative with these wonderful humans here with EB Prec back on December 5th last year with the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And why People Power Solar Cooperative? Why solar? Why energy? And that is a really key question because we do live in a society where people don't think about energy very much. And here's a pop quiz for y'all. Just a quick guess, what do you think is that? There's actually research that show the number of minutes that Americans have spent to thinking about energy in a whole year. Guess how many minutes that is? I got 1, I got 20. The answer is 6. 6 minutes is the number of minutes that Americans spend on thinking about energy. And as some people in the world are crazy enough to be worried about climate change, that is a big concern. And especially because if we don't have enough people thinking about energy, the act of the transition is not going to happen. We can have people getting really upset going on streets, but we don't think about what energy really means to us, we are missing that huge opportunity. And that's where I'm coming in from, is really coming from the climate activist standpoint on really trying to figure out what's the best way to create that shift that is really needed. And so I do have to say, 6 minutes is probably gonna get more and more and more thanks to the shut off that's happening from PG&E and all of our investor-owned utility. And I always get reminded every time after the blackout that energy helps me get things done. And for a lot of people that I know in the communities, we rely on energy to survive. And if energy is that important to us, should it be a commodity that companies just sell to us? How can we just have it in order to survive and thrive for ourselves? And that is a key question because right now we are being set into a relationship where most people look at energy with a relationship mostly with money. Like either how much money I'm spending on energy or how much money I'm owing to the energy company or how much money I can save if I were to go solar. And these are questions all related to money. And if we only look at money, we are missing the opportunity, especially if we're talking about transition into renewable energy where it can only exist on property that you own. And as Noni mentioned, in places like Oakland and many places, 60% of residents are renters. And how do we expect people to start to do something about this transition and actually have the equitable way to do it? So what we are at People Power Solar Cooperative is we are a movement cooperative that is designed to allow our 85 and growing number of owners to start their own solar cooperative so they can realize the powerful benefit of owning energy, financially as investors, socially to build community resilience, and environmentally to actually take on climate action collectively. And so we do it by really tapping into people's relationships so community can start working with each other even if they don't have a lot of capital, to leverage their capital to work with other property owners to go solar and they can collectively own energy. What we do is we're literally disconnecting the ownership of land from the ownership of power. So then as we're transitioning, even if we're really transitioning, which a lot of people are getting really afraid, if we're transitioning to 100% renewable energy, we're not mirroring the inequitable distribution of wealth that's been going on for the last centuries, as Noni mentioned. And how can we actually make sure that transition, one, happens, and two, when it happens, it's not going to exacerbate the income and wealth inequality that's happening in our country. And as community use our relationship, our social capital, to build power, we also allow community to steward and own the whole system. We start by activating the communities. We engage with the community and help people really understand what energy really means to our lives. Energy is not just debt. Energy is not just inconvenience when shut-off happens. Energy is literally everything. It is not just the electricity that projects this beautiful cartoon on the wall and project my microphone sound to you and create light and cell phones and camera, everything. Energy is literally everything that powers the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, and the houses that we live in. And if right now our relationship with energy is just a consumer, how much do we actually have a choice? So we use our tool or our model as a tool to allow communities to start to organize around being able to own energy and start to look at energy as something that's more than just money. So we engage communities to really understand what energy means and how important that is to them, and we start to have conversations around like, what if our communities can own a community-owned refrigeration system that is powered by community-owned energy, solar, and can be used as a community-owned distribution center that can distribute crops and produce from the local farmers to the grocery stores that we don't have in our neighborhood that's a food desert. Then energy ownership is more than just money. Energy ownership becomes access to food, healthy food. Or what if we use this model that literally disconnect ownership of land from ownership of power to convince the small number of homeowners that is in our highly gentrified or increasingly gentrified neighborhood to go solar together, that's owned by our own community because we start on a solar cooperative. We can actually start a owner's first right of refusal that Noni talks about, and we can push out developers. And all of these is really helping people to start to think about what energy could look like. And as people start to engage these projects, they start to ask a lot of questions on like, why is it that as an investor, when I put in money to build a solar project, I can only get 3% in return as dividend? Why is it that when I own energy on somebody else's roof, I don't actually see it on my electricity bill? Why is it that even when I go solar, when PG&E decide to shut it off, I still don't have electricity? And maybe all these three questions are questions that you didn't even know is real, and there's a lot more, and the answer is because our current energy policy supports wealthy investors. And most people don't know the biggest beneficiary of going solar is not the homeowner, it's the investor. The investor that is needed in our market-based economy for the transition into renewable energy, where it will actually put in capital to build projects. And our government think where can you get money? You don't have the money because we're already cutting so much taxes in our country. We have to rely on wealthy people. Like right now, Governor Newsom is literally talking about Warren Buffett buying the grid. And we are waiting for wealthy people to come and save us. And that is something that we need to shift. And there is a lot of injustice that's happening in the energy policy that it's literally stymieing the climate progress in our country, even in the state of California. So as people build projects and start to think about, or not even building, they start to think about these projects, in the process of building it, they ask these questions, they get really agitated, and they understand policy needs to change. And policy can only change if we have educated people. And so I'll show you our pilot project really quickly. We built our first project back in March on the roof of a local climate justice activist. The project is on a duplex apartment, and it costs roughly $16,000 to build. We have 75 owner members who put in only about $200 per share. It's really easy to come in and they get to own energy, get 3% dividend, and the homeowner gets 30% bill savings. And as we do that, this is a first project really proving this is actually, as far as we know, we're still looking. This is the first ever project in California that is owned by individuals who don't live under the roof. Because why? The policy doesn't allow us to do it. And the only way we're able to do it is because of the securities exemption from cooperative law that just got passed because of Sustainable Economies Law Center in 2015. And that is the power of cooperatives coming together, for people to come together to actually own energy even when the law doesn't allow that to happen, and agitating more people to know change needs to happen. And so The way it works, for those people who don't understand how solar works, is that the individual members could, I don't know, how do I do this? Pointer? Yeah, there you go. Individual person could actually buy a share from the cooperative, then the money goes into, 100% of the money goes into building the solar system or whatever system that the community decide to build, because it could be a refrigeration system that is powered by solar on the property, and the property will pay an electricity bill back to the cooperative. The cooperative then give the profit back to the member owner. This system, or this model, is very common model that for-profit companies like Sunrun and Tesla uses, except the only difference is it stops right here at the start, and the money goes straight up to some wealthy, great investors who's going to help save us in the future. And we don't have time to wait for a few people to come and help save us. And so, run quickly, the way that the system makes money is in roughly 25 years span. It generates as estimate generation of $40,000 income just from power sale alone. And we dissect the money into distributing to principal that we owe our owner members. We call it installation, but it's really principal money. And then we promise 3% dividend, so that's more than 40% of the power sale revenue will go into the pocket of our member owners, and then we have a very small slice on operations and maintenance of the system, which is really easy, and then operating and growing the cooperative. And that's how our project financing works, and 100% of money is funded by the community, because the community get to say what is really needed. And it's really important to say that with a cooperative, it activates people's intrinsic nature to do what is needed in their own community. So people get to vote with their own money and actually participate into building that world they really want to see. So the way we do it is, again, we are allowing communities to start their own solar cooperatives, so we provide technical, legal, and administrative support to help communities start their own solar cooperatives. So all they have to do is put together the community, hang out, come up with crazy ideas, figure out how to use the money they collectively come up with, all the fun stuff. Another case study right here, actually across the bridge in San Francisco, an Ingleside community, they actually got really inspired. We have this cartoon bylaws, which EB Preg has it too. The idea is to allow democratic understanding of the bylaws in order for more people to participate and drive it. And we have one owner who got really excited about the bylaws, went to his own neighborhood, knock on doors, and then was able to convince a number of people to get excited about this idea. Found out that within their neighborhood, somebody actually works for Tesla and runs the warehouse up in San Rafael, donated 150 panels, and they got another neighbor who's a percussionist to lend them a big truck with liftgate. They took a day off, drove up to the warehouse, picked those panels up, and now trying to figure out how to build these solar project in their own cooperative, collectively decide the revenue coming from the solar project could go into the community. It could go into building more solar project, or it could go into creating like a small mini library in the street, anything that the community wants, and create a space of communities to talk to each other more. And I want to quickly show the ecosystem of what's really happening in energy space, because that is a very foreign thing for a lot of people. The axis here, the horizontal axis, is on the far left side is a concentration of wealth, where wealth is being held, where its property is being held. And then all the way to the right is energy democracy, where the people get to own it. And then the y-axis at the very top is deploying capital for renewable energy, and then at the bottom is deploying capital for fossil fuels. Obviously, the first quadrant, lower left-hand corner, is boring. We don't really need to talk about it. But it's interesting thing about renewable energy is not all renewable energy is the same. It's extremely important as we're going through this climate emergency mode to really think about, as we're, quote, decarbonizing the grid, what exactly does that mean, especially with the shutoff that's happening. As a climate activist, I'm ashamed to say that I'm so grateful that I did not electrify my home. I'm so grateful that I have natural gas in my home. If the government takes my natural gas away and PG&E decide to spend the next 10 years shutting off all of our power every now and then. I literally will not only not have electricity, but I will not be able to have hot water or cook to eat in my own home. And I am a privileged person. Imagine all the people who don't even have a choice. And this is why it's so important for us to move toward the upper right-hand corner. And in terms of the ecosystem, the organization that's the most closest to what we are doing is up in the right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, co-op power and cooperative energy futures. And it's important to really see the bracket right next to it is in Massachusetts, New York, and Minnesota, because California does not have a law that is allowing people to own things. California is in the hands of corporations, and it only can be shifted if people are being activated to know how energy is important in our lives to actually shift into the power of the people. Right now, the law does not allow you to have access, or even, or you have access, you can get the crumbs if you're poor, but if you don't have the wealth, you don't get to have the benefit of going renewable energy, other than you get to pat your own back, and good thing you decarbonize your grid, but you can't feed your family. So in summary, what we're doing is activating our community to help people to activate, allow community to understand that energy needs to be a tool and can be a tool to build community power. And the reason we do it is because right now, literally right now, is the window of time in which we have the opportunity to shape the future of our energy and our society. And if we don't do anything about it right now, we will miss our opportunity, and it's either climate destruction, or we will have a continual setup wealth structure that is already built, and it's going to be so hard to change when the wealth is completely siphoned up and locked up in the hands of the 1%. And so what we need to do is to put all of our time and resources behind an equitable transition, behind a just transition of shifting away from the extractive economy. And that is it.
So both People Power and the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative label themselves as movement co-ops. And we've just heard about the two different movements that are like really important right now, that are almost at a tipping point where we have to make a decision on how we're going to construct our new future. So I'm curious for both of you, as a movement cooperative, one, how has there been any benefit to being a cooperative as opposed to a nonprofit? And secondly, can you share another experience of how either difficult or easy it's been to empower a community member to take their future into their own hands? We'll start with Noni.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Greg. It was a strategic choice on the part of both Sustainable Economies Law Center and East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative to be a California cooperative corporation. First of all, we wrote an exemption for that very purpose. In addition, the cooperative, in terms of movement building, our nonprofit field, just like the philanthropic field, has a mission to serve communities. The challenge is, as with any organizational formation, it can be manipulated almost surely by its structural purpose. So you find in a lot of our field, there are boards, there are executive directors, and these decisions are made increasingly in a silo fashion, where folks are being told after the fact what their choices are, how they can participate. And it almost, at this point, becomes performative. The function of the cooperative is, even in our legal obligation, it has an obligation to open up democratic decision-making to all of its members and to its community. So not only does it remodel some of our expectations we've had around how we create a social safety net, how we include our communities in transformation and change, It also opens up our capacity to use capital in a different fashion. Some of the challenges in the nonprofit field is that we can experience a lot of mission drift in our desire to seek funding from our donor organizations. So just like in the international humanitarian field, I'm sure you all have heard this challenge of being donor-driven as opposed to mission-driven. So the California Cooperative Corporation, although we do have a charitable mission and a charitable arm, Collective Action and Land Liberation Institute, we use our charitable funds to fund our operations so that our staff can show up in a manner that is really impactful and in service to our community. We use our profit status. We are a B Corp. We're in the process of getting our B Corp certification. We use our for-profit status to really, as I mentioned before, contest the market in a way that doesn't twist our arm to serve strictly donor interests. We are obligated through our structure and through our bylaws to really move our community's mission forward. And sometimes our community's mission will be in contradiction to some of our our donors' intention. And that's actually a win, right? Because when people can see themselves in a model, it activates them, it transforms them. And even if they choose not to participate in your particular organizational configuration, they can see in you their ability to do something similar. In terms of the challenges of getting people on board, we have all been so conditioned to the expectations and the strictures of the nonprofit field, often, especially in the beginning of our project, before we really had proof of concept. When we approached our community members, a lot of their hesitations, their no's were based on our historical experience with how the nonprofit field works in relationship to communities. And folks are really fatigued with having their human energy, their vision, their creativity tapped into without any real durable outcome that they can see at the other end. So a lot of our movement building work has simply been proving to our community that we're here for the duration and we're here to serve their interests. And we are putting our energy as much into hearing their voice and incorporating it into our approach as we are into our conversations with philanthropists and financiers and other nonprofit people functioning in the field.
Everything Noni said, I'm just gonna make it really quick. It's exactly what she said, and to a lot of the changes needs to happen. Really, the lack of participation is the one thing that is keeping us down. And it's not because of lack of education. A lot of people like to say it's a lack of education, lack of funding, all that, but it's a lack of the consciousness to allow people to understand that I am the answer, instead of waiting for this one person up top to do everything for me. We do live in a system where we just wait for things to be done for us, so then we just work hard, sometimes 2-3 jobs just to survive, and we don't really understand that we are the answer, especially we don't have to struggle by ourselves. When we come together, we can solve everything together. And by having a cooperative, it allows people to understand, have ownership, and actually have the reason to actually move things forward because they start to participate more. Especially when it comes to something as boring as energy. People don't understand what energy means, and if you just show up and talk about solar, people are just like, what is the panel made out of? People ask really ridiculous questions and waiting for, like, what if you can invent like a dish TV type of thing, but for solar, and everyone could just take the dish around. Just look at technology as a solution, and always forgetting that we are the answer, and these are just a tool, just like money. And so allowing people to participate in cooperative is allowing people to see everything as just a tool. We shouldn't be working so hard to get money. We should be working so hard to feed our family, to have a thriving community, and money helps us get there. So is our relationships, so is energy. And cooperatives help shift that consciousness completely. And I think that answered all your questions.
So, Crystal, coming back to you, I'm curious, you mentioned that you guys have some projects in the pipeline coming up for 2020, having just secured some solar panels from Tesla. Can you speak about that project, maybe some other projects? I know East Bay Community Energy is a big thing now. we're able to get off of PG&E's electrical grid almost, like they're still supplying the power, but a lot of it is coming through or is about to be coming through solar. So I'm interested, like future forward, where is a point for intervention in this community-owned solar fight? And yeah, how do you see funders here or abroad, like plugging in meaningful ways that not only provides accessible solar, but also provides the ownership that both of these co-ops are pushing as like a prime thing that needs to be accomplished?
Yeah, so the problem with energy we're having right now is not the fact that for-profit companies run it, because we've seen like government agency running energy or anything, there's also a lot of problem. The problem is really about the lack of participation from the people, and that's when democracy crumbles. Democracy is not just about voting. Democracy is about actively participating and building the society we want to see. And that's been taken away from us because we have been put into a situation where we're being lied to need to have some sort of product that we don't need. And we're in a society where all we have to do is make money to get by. And so people stop paying attention, and people start to rely on devices or technology to answer everything. So what's really needed right now in terms of energy sector and just empowering people to be able to have energy to survive and thrive is really allowing people to see that we are the answer. And a lot of people with PG&E right now, there's a lot of talk around like PG&E bailout or buyout or takeover. But the key question is, unless people start to participate into the management of the grid, and I'm not saying like every single one of us need to understand how the grid works, because that's never going to happen, but we need to actively understand how resources are being managed and how it's being distributed. And that can only happen if people come together. And so I'm going to use that example in Ingleside, where we got 150 panels donated from this group called Ingleside Community Power that was inspired because of our legal structure. What we do at People Power Solar Cooperative is providing that legal backbone and financial support, so then they don't have to deal with anything technical that we think we all have to deal with when we manage, own, and control energy. All they have to do is come together, drink beer, laugh, chat, build relationship with each other, and see, oh wait, you have energy, you need electricity to breathe at night in order to live. Well, we have to make sure this is a high priority, and making that governance decision to say what is a priority for our communities. So then as the people who are actually technical enough will be able to prioritize what is important. And right now the priorities go into money. And that is a flaw of the system. And the only way we can shift from prioritization of money into prioritization of people is to allow people to actively engage. And this is why cooperative is an extremely important for funders to start to look into as a solution instead of the nonprofit giving way, because it allows people to solve the solutions themselves. I don't know about you, but I feel like I would like a future where people solve the problem themselves instead of waiting for somebody else to do it. And the only way for us to live in that world is when people feel the ownership of the place they live in, and that's what cooperatives allow us to get there.
Wow. So I was expecting some talk about money, and you're like, no, we just need to participate, which is true. And I'm curious for you, Noni, after EB-Prec has like kind of gone through this piloting stage where we've proved to people that we can do some of these things, what's in the pipeline, and how can funders like intervene in this fight for permanent affordability? Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing to bubble up now that are going to be coming forward in 2020?
So many things. We have so many exciting projects in line for 2020. But part of our scaling vision is not to become the bottleneck for this approach. So what is exciting us more, and me in particular as a native of West Oakland, is witnessing a lot of organizations who have seen this outcome with individual organizations such as Liberating Ourselves Locally or Hasta Muerte, and are able to see how we can systematize this approach to make it available in whole or in part to many other organizations. There are tenants' rights organizations that are launching. There are smaller investment, community investment groups that are launching. There are other cooperatives that are coalescing around this concept. And what they need most, which really contributes to the nature of our mission, that is the mouthful, right? Because what is most impactful about what we do? There's nothing new, in a sense, about our idea about what needs to happen, right? Folks have known that they need capital to do any kind of work in a capital-centric society. And what we're doing is providing access to capital for projects. We're getting projects situated and ready to receive impact investment and low interest loans and support from our affordable housing developers, from our community land trusts. It's important to mention that every community, every small site development is going to be slightly different, so the capital stack is going to look different. On each of your tables, there are pieces of literature about our organization, so you can see all the ways we put together our capital stack and all the kinds of project models that we employ to make these projects work. So there's a FAQ there, and there's a little pamphlet of a few of our approaches. So what these projects most need are non-extractive access to capital and technical assistance to really manage and deploy this capital in an effective fashion. And I'll go back and say that one more time. Technical assistance, however, technical assistance that doesn't have so many strings attached that we reproduce the donor-driven vision. What I feel is also needed are clear frameworks and benchmarks for how community members get themselves positioned for access to non-extractive capital. Because what it is a black box. This is why you see in our mission this access not just to the technical, financial, and organizational. Our mission looks different in different places, but also the networks, right? Because we're talking about information here, and the information is the power. If there are a group of folks who can bring together enough capital to start the seed of a project, but they have no idea how to get the rest of the project set up for non-extractive investment, then there's the end of the vision right there, the beginning and the end. So if, as actors in this field, we know that we want to demystify and make transparent communities' access to capital, the 5 C's, if you will, to get yourself set up and ready to receive impact investment, and the non-extractive technical assistance that allows people to build in some of the gaps that will necessarily be present in community-based endeavors, then those are really the tools communities need to stand up on their own 2 feet. And this concept of risk, often risk bases the measures on having all of those pieces in place. But if we're being really authentic around dismantled communities, we have to acknowledge there are always going to be gaps, and that is part of our de-risking work, is to provide the inputs to fill those gaps and create a smooth arc from visioning to asset management long term.
Yeah. So I can ask some more questions, but I wanted to provide some space in case there were any questions in the room that people wanted to ask based on what's been said so far. If you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. Okay, I'm gonna come to you first, then you second.
Thank you. Much like in the last session, I just have a question about your the barriers to getting funding from foundations or donors. If you can give us an example of a best practice scenario with a funder that you've had where they kind of get it, and how have you talked about risk? How much have they put down on it? What are their expectations of you? I mean, those kind of real practical so that if there are any funders in the room or even other organizations that might need this kind of advice, you know, you can give it to us right now. That'd be great. Thanks.
Forgive me for beating my dead horse, but this is the question. So we have had a lot of really, I would argue, kind of transformative conversations with our impact investors. And at the end of those conversations, they often end in some permutation of, okay, but you're not ready. And so that is hopeful and disheartening all in the same breath. And so one of our solutions to get around that is to partner with organizations who do count as ready, who have a long history of property management or of developing properties. However, we're still trying to figure our way through positioning ourselves as an organization that falls into this kind of arbitrary, somewhat, pot of readiness or not readiness. And part of that has having to build the relationships, to know the right questions to ask, to know the right person of whom to ask the questions, and then figuring out how to channel that information back out into community projects so that, as I mentioned, as part of our mission, it can scale very quickly. Some of that comes from this inheritance of this competitive field from the nonprofit field, where there is this experience of a shortage of capital or a rarity of capital, but we know this field is actually flooded with capital. One of the reasons that our community organizations, well, one of the symptoms of how our community organizations don't see it is we know that for VC capital, women-led organizations and communities of color organizations receive something like 0.02% of VC capital, of venture capital. So some of these, as I mentioned earlier, that my work is in symbolic production in organizations, some of this has to do with uprooting some of our deeply entrenched racial and gendered presumptions about potential versus performance, and the differentiated kinds of input that we need to make available through our capital and through our power of commanding capital and technical assistance to these organizations. If we're talking about creating equity, we know equity means that some people need glue for their tires and other people need a tire. And so those inputs that that remediate some of the elements that have been removed from community capacity need to be exempted from this measure of risk or riskiness, right? Where we need to take our charge, either in partnering with other organizations or within our own organizations, create departments that deal with mitigating risk through technical support. So that is the biggest barrier that we find when we're in conversation with our impact investors and our mission-aligned lenders who love our projects, who love the vision. We're all hopeful of living in an equal society where people have dignity, where people can do for themselves, where we can join together on some sort of relatively equal ground. But some of us with more privilege, including myself, have to think of ourselves not just as gatekeepers, but also as servants to those who are standing outside of the gates. Yes, I'll say that.
And I would say that the experience that we've had, yes, like the let's say the funders that generally supported us, it's primarily because we work closely with organizations, like Noni's saying, organizations who have a lot of track record. And so then we can look like we're ready, even though we have a lot of numbers of people who don't have a lot. We literally will have application talking about how we have communities from a low income who literally are in debt and will put in $500 to get ownership of People Power Solar Cooperative. And that, you cannot get any more conviction of what is needed in the community. than that. When communities who don't have a lot are investing into it, I think that's a moment when funders need to start listening and seeing what's important, as opposed to looking at the return on investment, even though it's really a donation money, and still looking a lot to the same framework to measure what success means. And that's a lot of barriers that we've been running into, is trying to prove to ourselves the metric of a very much of a technical and quantitative way of saying like the number of megawatts that we built, number of solar projects we built, to like the number of members that we recruited. I would say if we were to be serious about the metric, about getting as many members as possible, most of the people in our cooperative are going to be living in Berkeley or in San Francisco, and the demographic will shift dramatically. But because we spend so much energy into the relationship of the community, that story right there, I think, is the biggest indication for any funder to understand what a return on investment really means. If the people who don't have a lot of money are putting in money, I don't know, maybe one could say that because we're so good at marketing ourselves, like Apple is good at marketing the phone, so then people are addicted to buy more shoes that they don't need. I would say that's a flattering assumption that a lot of funders would give us and say like, oh, you're just like trick people into giving money. Not that they actually said it, but by not listening to our community's action of investing and being part of the owner of people power is basically saying that, well, it's just marketing, and this is not a real solution. And I think it's important to really listen to the story of the type of projects that's coming out of community-led projects like that. We need to stop looking at the number of jobs created, because that's gonna take a long time. We need to stop looking at all the quantitative measures.
Thank you both. I'd also like to give a shout out to Optima Business Bootcamp. They did a session earlier this morning where they were talking about how they work with self-help credit union to reduce some of the barriers around lending. And they just finished up a pilot project here in Oakland, going to Boston next year. Here you go.
Oh, thanks. This is kind of a similar question, but more from the banking end. You mentioned that banks are not really necessarily like well equipped to lend to projects like yours. What was that? And I noticed that you got funding from Presidio Bank. What was that experience like, and how long does that take to navigate? And do you think banks are getting any more hip to this kind of thing, or no?
I would hand it to Noni, because we have not gone to a stage of lending money yet.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the former question, the conversations with our mission-aligned lenders have been really great and encouraging. When we get down to risk, a couple of things have shown itself. One is that inside of the banks, there has to be kind of a renewed vigor of redefining how one frames risk for a cooperative organization, right? Because there's no one person, one CEO upon which you can rest risk. So just in terms of sheer structural constraints, there needs to be some rethinking of how cooperatives can be lent to. And it's particularly in relationship to risk. So I'll give you a really emblematic conversation we had with one of our mission-aligned lenders when we were discussing our ADU vision for the Deep East Oakland. They were piloting something in LA around ADUs, and we were asking them if they would be interested in lending to our East Oakland ADU project. And our banker, our commercial banker officer was very excited about it. And what he said was, that's really great. We would have to put second mortgages on the homes. That would decrease their value, but that's okay. And we moved on to the next topic. And I spent a good 5 minutes sort of struggling with myself, like, do you challenge your officer, or do you just let it go uncontested? And I felt like there needed to be some light around it. And if you don't know much about the Deep East Oakland, this is labor housing that was built in the 1940s and 1950s. It's really emblematic of the communities that have never been reinvested in, and in fact, had a lot of its value stolen through predatory lending, through the loss of home values, through the loss of heavy industry. So these folks are already struggling with keeping and accessing value in their homes. So to put second mortgages on homes that probably already have first, seconds, and have experienced devaluation really just perpetuates the problem that we're trying to remediate. And so the question that I asked him was, is that really how we want to approach, or do we want to really rethink our tools and our presumptions around risk? So the most the most well-intentioned actors are constrained by their organization's need to catch up to how you redefine risk in relationship to community projects and in relationship to cooperative projects. So what we've done is we've kind of, our strategy in EB-PREC is to skirt structural constraints by bringing into conversation with our unique approach organizations who have a means through these approach. So with the Presidio Bank loan, what we stood on was Northern California's land trust reputation that they had already built. So the first initial loan moves through their organization. When we do the transfer to full ownership at the 3-year arc, we will have built at that point 5 years of financials that then position us to be able to hold the loan. And by then we will have about 6 to 15 assets of our own that are on our books. So while we're trying to do this kind of retuning around how you support community-based endeavors, we are, if you will, capitalizing on the work that's already been done in our field to bring funding to our projects. So I don't know if that's a solution, but it's certainly how we're approaching it right now.
Okay, maybe the last question.
Hi, I'm Hillary with Project Equity, also a co-op person, and I think we have some friends in common. Hi, Greg. This is so exciting. I'm just thrilled to hear more about both of these initiatives, and wanted to just echo what you were just saying, Noni. I think at the national level, working in employee ownership and worker co-ops, we've had the Main Street Employee Ownership Act passed about 1.5 years ago. It's an unfunded mandate for the Small Business Association to promote succession planning and to include worker cooperatives in that, and then for the small business development centers to do the same, and those exist all over the country. But there was a lot of hope that that would lead to some lifting of the misunderstandings and the way that cooperatives don't mix with the traditional way of thinking about risk. And the Small Business Administration, in spite of a lot of lobbying from around the country, chose not to waive this notion of the individual guarantees. You don't have the single CEO. So I think we do have some really big battles in trying to shift the way that bankers think about risk and what's a good investment, even though the track record of these types of entities is so strong. So I just want to echo, and appreciate what you all are doing in terms of demonstrating the viability of these community-owned projects and these new forms of cooperatives is just so important. So on the one hand, hurrah, and congratulations. And I think I'll also just ask a question, if we have time, Noni, if you could speak a little bit more to the impact investor side, because I think it's been a similar conversation with the impact investment fields that has been with the lending field around, come on, just be a little more bold. And what I took from your description of your model is that the community investments, all of those community investments that you've raised, sort of created a base of capital that the impact investors were then willing to say, okay, if they have that, we'll put something in. So could you speak a little bit to the impact investor side as well?
Yeah, you've hit that nail on the head. Ed Whitfield, a great, great man, you guys should look up some of his work, has asked us to stop referring to everything as capital because it makes us confused about what it's for and who owns it, if you will. But you've hit the nail on the head that we have attempted to leverage critical community support as a demonstration, almost as our guarantor of the viability of the project. And in the impact investment field, there's been an interesting, so I don't know if you guys know about something very popular among impact investors. It may have come up at the recent SOCAP, but this idea of compassionate investment. But the challenge is that it's still asking for the kinds of returns from community that do not jibe with the concept of of compassionate nor non-extractive. And so if you are reaching 6% and 7% of your expectation of return, you've already exited the non-extractive or compassionate range in relationship to communities that are pretty much hobbled by financial tools. So in addition to speaking to our mission-aligned investors, we are also joining in on the conversation. So for example, Olamina Fund just launched last night, and Chrysalis Fund is working on launching and really thinking about another way of creating impact through investment in communities. And what this means is, though, peers need to be educating peers, right? We kind of are the tip of the spear, and others like us, in terms of peers seeing the bubble and the presumptions around what extractive and non-extractive look like, what terms look like. But what happens is we still live in a society where it's a trust-based society, even though we've become so complex and expansive, it doesn't feel like that. But each of you in the room reads the books that your peers read, attend the conferences that your peers attend. So you are also the folks who re-educate your peers around what our real goal is for creating transformative impacts with the capital we have available to us. So funds like that are very hopeful in terms of starting to re-educate other donor-advised funds, other self-directed IRA funds, and so on and so forth. But it's one step at a time. So I'll give you an example. This sort of goes back to mission-aligned investors. But we really have to think about what return means. For some of those federal funds that are transferred to CDFIs who have been given the social charge to reassemble dismantled communities, they're often given this capital at 3 to 0%. They resell the capital often to communities at 6 to 7%. You've lost the impact, right, in that translation between the costs given to you from the federal government funds to your administrative and personal need to respond to your stakeholders at the point of dispensing the funds after the gamut, which is often loaning at no less than $2.5 million, which we know small community organizations can very rarely get the legs to be able to qualify for those kinds of pots of funding. So the real challenge in the philanthropic field is to truly transform what philanthropy's goal is under the surface. We know that the first philanthropic organizations, their real function were tax shelters. And so we have to find a way to not hold that openly held secret anymore and really talk about where the trade-off is from people who benefit from our roads, our humans, our society, our access to the internet. These are all public assets, and where their return is coming when they're able to have this credit thing called money or capital. Return does not always have to come back as a percentage rate. Return can come back as better run municipalities. Return can come back as better run organizations. But that's a value set that has to be passed from peer to peer. So I don't know if that's a sufficient response, right? But it's work that we still have yet to spread throughout our.
Thanks. So we're just at time. I'm going to invite everyone to say a closing remark. Mine is, I've been meditating on Amazon, and they're like scaling up and gobbling up of market, and realizing that they're doing that by being willing to lose money. And because they're willing to lose money, they're able to basically be in every aspect of our lives. And if we're going to try and get to the new economy as any means necessary, I think it's important that we at least know that that's a thing and make a decision on if we want to ignore it or we want to try and incorporate it in some way.
So I think what my closing remark would be referring to the zebras that we all might be familiar with. You all know unicorns, that's startups that make billions of dollars. They're disruptive, and the zebras are basically like the animal zebras, they all come together as a society. And in recognizing the fact that if you're disrupting based off of profit, we are going to unravel or dismantle the very social network that is holding our democracy and our community together. And the zebras are the ones that is collectively holding that. And yeah, that's the cooperative. We need to allow people to participate and be zebras and help ourselves.
Yes, I'll piggyback on Crystal and Greg's comment that if we are really thinking about our society surviving with a vision that we all want to be a part of, we do have to think about how to decentralize power. And decentralizing power means channeling the tools of power out to smaller groups to experiment with. Most of our startup capital, if you will, has come from experimental funds. And we know that our Republican counterparts over the last 10 or 15 years have channeled billions of dollars into almost any endeavor that had even a slight chance of success. So we know that part of American innovation is R&D. So if we're looking to innovate in the field of community development, in the field of impact investment, we have to really take an R&D approach to the most impactful, decentralized, community-based endeavors that we can manage in our regular lives and inside of our organizational lives.